it's going to be. Don't worry that you can't see anything because here is a title slide that tells you you're in the right place. It's an absolute joy to be back talking to you. Um, I really enjoyed the last two evenings spent nattering about all things bird and wildlife. But this talk has got a particular resonance for me because it's one of the most special periods of my life and one of the most special countries that I've been to and had the good fortune to live in. It's also rather timely because now, if you were to go to Argentina, you would have a wonderful field guide to accompany you. Sadly, when I was there, Mark and Juan, Nacho as we know him, were in the middle of writing it. And they've been in the middle of writing it for about 25 years. So I spent a lot of my time with Mark and with Nacho going around with the plates from Birds of Argentina and the text in Mark's head, but no actual field guide. Anyway, who's talking to you? You sort of know who I am. I write primarily about the nexus between wildlife, travel, and conservation for magazines, newspapers, lots of books. Three new books last year about Spain and France, and an update to the British Weekends Guide, and two books that are out not just this year but this month. And I took delivery of the Pantanal book today and the Mammals of Iberia book last week. So it's all very exciting. So I was flicking through my own book earlier today, being quite excited. The other thing I do is lead tours for a company called Wildlife Travel that, unlike every other tour company, donates all its profits to conservation. That's why I lead for it. But I said this was going to be a special talk, and that's because this is all about my relocation to Argentina a number of years ago. I was very lucky that I married someone who worked for the then Foreign Commonwealth Office. So she got a posting eventually as Deputy Ambassador in the British Embassy in Buenos Aires. And I up sticks from my civil service career, took 3.5 years out and went to go and be a diplomatic house husband, which I have to say was one of the most enjoyable experiences I ever had because I got to tour the continent. I got to photograph birds left, right, and centre. I got to lead tours down to the Antarctic. I got to write my first book about the Pantanal. This is the first version of the one that came out today. End up writing a book about Antarctica. And this was all fantastic, but really it was my adopted home country that stole my heart with its lovely pale blue and white coloration in the national flag. And how could it not? Because there were not one, not two, but three species of hummingbirds living in our city centre garden in Buenos Aires. So no wonder that it stole my heart. Now, Argentina, it's huge. It's the second largest country in South America. It's the eighth largest country in the world. Of course, it's dwarfed by Brazil, but nevertheless, within Argentina, you can put the outline of every Western European country within its borders and still have space left over. So it's a really big place. It's not somewhere that you pop to for a week's holiday. It's a 2 or 3 week holiday, probably 3 or 4 times if you want to do it properly. And when you think of Argentina, what is it that comes to mind? Is it the football, the famous hand of God moment from Diego Maradona, or the less ostentatious skills of Lionel Messi? Or is it that wonderful flag to which I alluded before? Or indeed the gaucho cowboys that are so sort of integral to the national identity of Argentina? And with those gaucho cowboys, of course, there must be cows. And of course, that means beef. And you're talking huge plate-sized steaks and all the accompaniments. Perfect if you're a meat lover, not so good if you're a vegetarian. And to wash down all those huge steaks, you've got to have a glass or 4 of Malbec. And with all that red Latin blood and wine and meat, it's got to manifest itself in the bittersweet dance come mating ritual of tango. And I may be dressed in my tango gear, but rest assured I'm not going to dance for you. So, I mean, what more could you want for a holiday, or indeed for a country to move to and live in for a few years? Well, I would say birds and birds and birds and birds and birds. And by golly, Argentina is not only packed full of culture, it's packed full of birds too. And that's why I'm showing you all these slides straight away. Anyway, this is the field guide that you will now take with you if you to go. And as I said, I was sort of integral to its writing process by carrying Mark's bags as he was researching the birds' countries. But why would he go to Argentina for birds? What's so special about it? There's at least 1,000 species in the country, 950 of which are regular. That places it roughly the 15th most speciose country in the world in terms of birds. The top bird listers have seen well over 900. That's a lot of birds to see. There's lots of species that occur nowhere else in the world. Those are the breeding endemics. The last time that BirdLife updated that red list, there were 54 globally threatened birds, which again puts it in the top 20 most important countries in the world. There are 266 important bird areas. There are 10 endemic bird areas. There are just places that are globally significant for birds all over the country. So this is a map of the important bird areas that was produced by Aves Argentinas, which is the equivalent of the RSPB out in Argentina, the BirdLife International partner. And you'll see the two insets relate to the boxes in the northwest and the northeast of the country. And they show that those are the two single most important areas for birds and bird conservation in this enormous country. Now, it's a country that if you do go to for a holiday, I suggest around 3 weeks, you could easily see 500 species of birds. And that is a lot of birds to get your head around. But more importantly than the number, it's the quality, not the quantity. There are some really sought after, evocative species that I'm going to show you during this talk. And there's immense variety as well. There's immense variety in size, from this tiny eared pygmy tyrant that is way smaller than a goldcrest. And it's now gone up to the northwest of the screen, top left, because this is it, roughly size for size, real life comparison with one of the bigger birds. So this is one of the royal albatrosses, the southern royal albatross, second only to the wandering albatross as the bird with the largest wingspan, 3.5 meters of it pretty much in the world. Those little birds on the right and the left of the screen, those are black-browed albatrosses. And if you know how big they are compared to our gannets, then you can get a feel for quite how enormous the southern royal albatross is. So there's immense variety, not just in size, but also in colour. There's a proper rainbow spectrum going on in terms of the birds of Argentina. Although admittedly, quite a lot of them are brown. Argentina does a very good show of brown. There are various browns evolved, from pale brown, mid brown, dark brown, slightly sandy brown, a little bit chestnut brown as well. But brown is good. Brown is the new brown, or whatever the expression is. There's also great variety in status, from the amazingly common cingolo, rufous collared sparrow. Now, I'm going to show you a lot of these little graphs up top left, because part of my ethos is to try and spread the conservation message. So this common bird, is least concern, which basically means it's of no worry to conservationists at all. But as you go left along that little chart, you go through NT, which is near threatened, VU, which is vulnerable, EN, endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild, and then extinct. So as you go further left, the more worrying things get. So there's immense variety in status, from these common birds right up to the critically endangered hooded grebe. So there's a whole range of things. And I'll try and introduce some of those conservation themes throughout the talk. It's also a country where the voyages of discovery are still in train. There's been new species for science described in each one of these groups in the last few years. And there's some proper mysteries. Nobody really knows what the orange-billed terns are that live on the Buenos Aires coast in late summer. No one knows if they're sandwich terns or they're elegant terns that have got the continent wrong, or whether they're something else entirely. So there's lots of mysteries going on. Another great mystery are seed eaters. So seed eaters are little kind of sparrow-like birds. And again, these seem to be in active speciation, so within our lifetimes. So within our lifetimes, the bird in the middle seems to have come out of nowhere through hybridization with other species. It's created an entirely new form. And it was so exciting, it was discovered new and described new for science, not once, but twice. And that makes things very complicated indeed, as the little note at the bottom says. And all this takes place in the most spectacular of landscapes, from Iguazu Falls in the northeast of the country. That's where the film The Mission was shot. through to the Araucaria monkey puzzle forests, also in the northeast of the country, then down to the Pampas around Buenos Aires, the home of the gaucho, and all the way down to the Beagle Channel. Anyone who's taken the journey of a lifetime down to Antarctica will have gone to Ushuaia and seen the Beagle Channel, named after Charles Darwin's ship, of course. And coming up the west side of the country, we go through the Andes. So they've got a Torres del Paine fringes of, Torres del Paine being in Chile, but bordering on to Argentina, up through into Andean forest, up to the kind of deserts in the high Andes. Oh, there's just so much to enjoy and see in Argentina. So I'm going to give you a sort of whistle-stop tour of this enormous country in the remaining 50 minutes or so. So let's go tango birding. If I get this right, I'm going to start in Buenos Aires, around there. Then I'm going to head south along the Atlantic coast, down into Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego, then back up the west side or central west side with Chaco and Cordoba. I think it's got 4 and 5 the wrong way around. Anyway, up to the northwest, and I'll finish the talk in the northeast because it's, of all the places, it's probably the most remarkable. Okay, kick off in the Pampas. This is the area either side of Buenos Aires. Lots of grasslands here, wetlands, possibly the world's best urban nature reserve. And even in a long weekend, you see a couple of hundred species without trying too hard. And we're going to have a look at some of those, some of the highlights listed there, but we're going to have a look at some of them. So in the grasslands, in the Pampas, you'll be looking for birds like the scarlet-hooded blackbird, also known as the Federal, in Argentina. These are blackbirds not like our thrushes. These are blackbirds in the form of icterids. We don't really have an equivalent in Europe. It's very much a New World phenomenon, but we call them blackbirds because they're predominantly black. We've got birds who include a bit of the grass in their name. So the great pampa finch is a common species. Somewhat larger is the greater rhea, and you can see that it's near threatened. So it's on conservationist radar as a potential future conservation problem. And in part, that's because it's hunted for its meat and also for its feathers, which are turned into feather dusters. And these feather dusters are sold throughout every city in Argentina. There's also slightly smaller birds in these grasslands, but pretty large as it happens. These are called southern screamers. These are almost turkey-like birds, very large, stocky creatures that take to the wing. And when they take to the wing, they look a little bit more like eagles. You could probably see this little kind of tooth claw sort of sticking out of the wing. That's a device for fighting. So the males fight with those. And the screamer is well named because its call is indeed a wail, a loud scream, cha-ha, cha-ha. And indeed, the Argentine and Uruguayan name for this bird is cha-ha, so named very much onomatopoeically after its call. Other birds in the grassland area include the whites, so white monjita, and the blacks, spectacled tyrant. You see the little white wing flash of this bird here, and that's because in these enormous pampas grasslands, male birds need to catch the attention of females if they're going to get a mate. And so what this bird does is it flies up in the air and it flashes those little white wing flashes that catch the sun, glint, and thus can be seen over quite considerable distance. So the females, if so inclined, can spot a male and come towards him and check him out. Other birds, one that is sort of vaguely familiar to us here in the UK is buff-breasted sandpiper. And the large majority of the buff-breasted sandpiper population that breeds right up in the Arctic winters down in southeast Brazil and along the sort of eastern Argentine, northeast Argentine coast, sort of on the fringes of Buenos Aires. Other grassland birds, and grasslands are a very threatened habitat in Buenos Aires, include the bearded tachuri, which is one of a number of birds which have got a rather punkish crest. You'll see more of those later. The Hudson's canistero, doing its bit for brown, this bird. There's about 6 shades of brown on that. See if you can spot them all. And the bay-cap wren spine-tail, slightly fewer shades of brown, but like its predecessor, also near threatened. So these are speciality species of the grasslands around Buenos Aires. So even if you think, nah, I'm not bothered about seeing tango dancing, I'm not bothered about eating enormous steaks, I'm just going to leave Buenos Aires as quickly as possible and head off somewhere else, I'd say just give it a couple of days. Go and live like a gaucho for a bit. Go and do some gaucho bird watching. Or go and have a look at the wetlands and go and look at some of the kind of wildfowl, such as this black-necked swan that live here. And the wetlands are what characterises what I think is probably one of, if not the best, urban nature reserve in the world. This is Costanera Sur, and it is right on the edge of the central business district in Buenos Aires. So it's basically like a superb nature reserve at Canary Wharf. And this is somewhere you can go for a little morning walk and come away with 120 species without having broken sweat. And those species may include ones like white-tufted grebe, Coscaroba swan. I mean, what a to die for bird this is. How beautiful is that? Rosy-billed pochard, continuing the pink-billed theme. And then black-headed duck, which cunningly is the only brood parasite amongst the ducks. It doesn't lay its eggs in its own nest. It chooses another duck's nest to lay them in instead. Sneaky bird, a bit like a cuckoo. There's waders here as well, so lesser yellowlegs and greater yellowlegs. And in the kind of the scrubbery and the reedery, the sedges around the water bodies, there are curve-billed reed haunters and there are straight-billed reed haunters. And the straight-billed is slightly more exciting than the curve-billed because it's rarer, it's near threatened, and it's even bigger. And it looks quite cool with that kind of lovely graduated tail. But there are colourful birds in these wetlands. This is the many-coloured rush tyrant. This is a bird that is so unique that it is in its own family. So there has no close relatives. And that's sort of the default conclusion that ornithologists, taxonomists have come to after decades of wrangling about whether it was a tyrant or a flycatcher or something else. They thought, no, a many-coloured rush tyrant is a rush tyrant and there's nothing else like it. In the same kind of places you're seeing that coloured bird, you'd be seeing a little wren-like rush bird. And I quite like this bird. It really did remind me of a wren. It was peculiarly well named. A sort of a wren mixed with a sedge warbler, perhaps. So it made me sort of feel as if I was at home. Okay, that's sort of Buenos Aires, the Pampas done. We're going to head down the east coast, down the Atlantic coast. We're going to take a couple of boat rides off the coast of the coastal resort of Mar del Plata. We're going to have a look at the estuaries and beaches, and we're going to see a variety of southern birds. Some of them will be migratory waders, such as this bared sandpiper. This is also a migratory wader, but it's a very different one. The Magellanic plover, like that many-coloured rush tyrant, is so evolutionarily unique that it's in a family with its own. This slide is actually out of date. I think at the last December, BirdLife International changed its global status from near threatened to vulnerable. And they did so because surveys by a friend of mine who I worked with when I was out in Argentina found that rather than the estimated 4,000 or 5,000 birds in the world, which isn't a lot at all, there were actually only 800 of these species left. And for an evolutionarily unique species, that is really worrying. So thank goodness that some of the NGOs out there are now doing some conservation work on it, funded in part by a charity that I help out called Near Tropical Birding and Conservation, formerly known as the Near Tropical Bird Club. Other rare birds in this area that we can see, Olrog's gull, again, near threatened. Quite an attractive species for a gull. I'm not a gull fan, but this one's quite pretty. This is definitely very lovely. The snowy crowned tern, a very common species. But you'll see these just around the coast itself. They don't venture far offshore. But if we were to take a pelagic offshore, and they do run from the coastal resorts, because there's a lot of bird watchers now in Argentina, particularly since I left, actually. Nothing to do with me leaving. It's more the sort of the way in which digital photography has enabled anyone with a so even a medium-sized camera to become a nature photographer and thus a bird watcher. So there's a big birding scene in Argentina now. And if we were to take one of these pelagics offshore, we'd be looking for birds like the Cape petrel or the pintado petrel, as it's also named, the painted petrel. We'll be looking for sooty shearwaters, a species that we do get quite regularly here off the southwest and North Sea coasts. This one we certainly don't get here, though, white-chinned petrel. It's a bird that is globally threatened, vulnerable as it shows you up there, and that's in part because this bird is sort of has an addiction for trying to steal the bait from long-line fishing vessels. And what it doesn't realise until too late is if it grabs the bait from these vessels, it impales itself on a barb, and that barb basically doesn't release the bird. The line goes down, sinks right into the deep sea, and the bird, of course, drowns. So this species has gone from being very common to relatively rare and in danger. So just as well, BirdLife International, through its Albatross Task Force, has been doing brilliant stuff over the last couple of decades to change the way in which fishing vessels use long lines and use trawl cables and use purse seine nets, and to make them a lot more not more seabird friendly. I've just written an article, two articles this week about that, one for the BirdLife International magazine and one for Birdwatching magazine, which some of you may read. So white-chinned petrel, also southern giant petrel, very common offshore, and the black-browed albatross. Now this one, you can see that well, it doesn't say. That's strange. It should say that that's what it says. It says it's least concern. Well, actually, when I was in Argentina, it was classified as endangered. So, one step away from being critically endangered, which is basically extinct within our lifetime unless we take action. Well, fortunately, BirdLife, through its partner in Argentina, Aves Argentinas, did take action, changed the way fisheries operate, and suddenly the survival rates of black-browed albatrosses rocketed, and that species is now no longer in danger of extinction. It's a really good conservation success story. There are other albatrosses, though, Atlantic yellow-nosed albatross, and of course the southern royal albatross, which I showed you towards the start of the talk. And that's just a reminder that it's with black-browed albatrosses and absolutely dwarfs them. Its bill alone is about the size of a neck of a black-browed albatross, a true giant of the southern waters. So that's our second area done. And we're going to keep on going south. We're going to venture slightly inland into Patagonia. Bruce Chatwin wrote an amazing book. What's it called? In Patagonia, something like that, which superbly brings to life the huge landscapes. It really is a place where you feel very small as a human. The skies are big, the plains are big, the mountains are big, and it's a place that is quite inhospitable to human life. But somehow gauchos in particular do eke out an existence here. But it's also got, as you further go west in Patagonia, the habitat changes quite markedly into southern beech forest, into the equivalent of our Lake District. They do call it the Lake District out there. And if you head further south, you come to montane passes, you come to the Beagle Channel, and you come to the domain of the hooded grebe, possibly the most special bird in Argentina. We'll start on the Atlantic coast, and we'll start with penguin colonies, huge penguin colonies down here. We'll see a little bit of those in a bit, but the Valdez Peninsula is the place that most people know down here from Living Planet, Blue Planet type documentaries. This is the domain of the southern elephant seal. I know we're here talking about birds, but actually some of the marine mammals are quite spectacular too. This is the place where southern right whales come to breed. This is the place where orcas beach themselves in order to eat southern sea lions. But it's also the place for enormous colonies of Magellanic penguins. One at Punta Tombo is something like 1 million birds. And this is also a globally threatened species. So it's a pretty impressive colony of a pretty rare species. Other birds in this sort of open desert area are the partridge-like elegant crested tinamou. This is a really interesting species. I haven't worked out what's going on socially with these yet, but you always see them in groups of 3. So is this mum, dad, and babby? Or is this some form of cooperative breeding going on there? Or is there some form of polygamy going on? Are there 2 males, 1 female, 2 males? I've never quite worked it out. I'm sure someone clever has done. But either way, these are smart birds to enjoy. as are morning Sierra finches, which sort of feed around your feet while you're looking at these penguins. So from the coast, we're going to head inland now. We're going to head due west to the sort of foothills of the Andes into the Lake District. And here we're going to look for ashy-headed geese, birds of rivers such as the ringed kingfisher, and birds of the southern beech forests such as the black-throated whet-whet, which is sort of like a massive wren, really. The tapaculos are basically big wrens. This one's called a whet-whet because its call is whet-whet, so that's quite useful to remember. So when you hear a whet-whet, you know it's probably a black-throated whet-whet. There's also Chukau tapaculo. I like this bird. It reminded me of a robin, and it was also very friendly, also very easy to identify because its song too was basically enshrined in its name. It goes Chukau, Chukau, Chukau. And given that it's quite a skulking bird, you wouldn't otherwise know it were present if you were not to hear its song. And one tapaculo down the size order is Magellanic tapaculo. Now this is slightly interesting. In South America, the Andes has turned out to be an immense font of speciation, of diversity in tapaculos. So when I first went to the Andes in, I don't know, mid-90s, early 90s, there weren't very many species, and now there's probably 50 or 60 species. And that's because at every altitudinal sort of band, ornithologists discovered that the tapaculo in that band was singing different to the tapaculo 400 meters uphill. And if it was singing differently, they realized it was probably going to be a different species, and sure enough, it was. And the only place that isn't true is down in Argentina, which just has one species of these grey tapaculos down in the south. But that at least makes it easy to identify. So I rather like these wren-like birds. But in these forests, there are other wacky birds too. So the Demeur's wiretail. I don't know who Madame or Monsieur Demeur's was, but they certainly named their wiretail very well. I mean, look at that for a protrusion. That's not molting. That's the male's tail as is. It's almost as if it's carrying around this enormous peacock-like tail to say, hey, if I can cope with this on my back, surely my genes are good and I'm worth mating with. So I think it is a similar principle to the peacock. If I can survive predators despite basically carrying half a bush on my backside, then surely my genes are strong and you should choose me rather than him, even if his tail does look a bit similar to mine. Other birds, less exciting birds, but more visually aesthetic, include the rufous-tailed plant cutter, part of the cotingas, which are very much a South American and Central American family, and Patagonian tyrant. It may not look much, but for me it was very special because it was my 800th species of bird in Argentina when I finally clapped eyes on this particular individual. So that made me very happy indeed. Other parts of Patagonia away from the beech forests, I've got these montane plateaus, these stony plains, and that's the domain of tawny-throated dotterels, which is what this species is. So it's effectively performs the same ecological function as our dotterel, the one that you might go up the Cairngorm funicular to go and see. And there's lesser rheas here. And rheas, I didn't mention this earlier, but this isn't a mum, this is a dad rhea, because the male mates with multiple females, he makes a huge nest, all the females lay their egg in his nest, and he looks after the entire brood with no further help from her. So he's my role model as someone who put parenthood and looking after my child before my career. I look up to lesser rheas and greater rheas. They're good birds, doing a good job. Slightly smaller on the brown scale, there's Patagonian tinamous. So it's a bit like the elegant crested tinamou, but only occurs in Patagonia, quintessentially Patagonian, and actually not very easy to see. So we were quite lucky to see them when we did. A friend of mine had spent 3 years on the Patagonian plateaus studying hooded grebes, which I'll talk about later, and he'd never seen a Patagonian tinamou. He's now chief executive of the BirdLife Partner, out there, Aves argentinas, and he has seen Patagonian tinamou. Indeed, he set up an entire reserve, an entire national park where Patagonian tinamou is quite common. So he's quite pleased with himself now. This is also the domain where the Magellanic plover breeds. So when I showed you it in sort of the Atlantic coast, it was there on its wintering grounds. This is where it nests. And like sort of so the word Magellanic plover, we've also got the Magellanic horned owl, which is, I think, now a separate species from great horned owl that you know from North America. It certainly looks and sounds very different. You've also got the Austral rail, which was feared extinct until two friends of mine went on an expedition funded by the charity I mentioned, near Tropical Birding and Conservation, and they rediscovered it after sort of 50 years of it not being seen. So we're sort of, you can tell we're sort of in the south of the world, the south of South America, by the names of these birds. There's Australs, there's Magellanics, there's Patagonians. We're very much in the realm of special creatures in a special place. But none is quite so special as the hooded grebe. Now, this was a bird that is only just turned 50. It was unknown to science until the early 1970s. When an Anglo-Argentine named Maurice Rumbold, who was sort of like the David Attenborough of Argentina until his death a few years ago, he found this bird on an isolated lake somewhere in Patagonia, realized it was nothing on Earth. It was new to science, described it. And it's basically an extremely rare bird. And even was when he discovered it, he reckoned there was probably 4,000, but only 4,000. It's considered critically endangered because now there's probably only 600 to 800 of these birds left. And it's a remarkable creature. Like many grebes, it has a fantastic display. And if we're lucky, and if I can get it to work, which I might not be able to, we're going to see a video of its display. I hope you enjoyed that interlude. It's not something I can take credit for. It was a film made by two people I got to know at the bird fair who wanted to give up their jobs, travel around South America for a year, and came to me for some ideas about what they might do. So I put them in touch with Aves argentinus. They decided to make a film about the hooded grebe. That was it. In the end, they ended up living in South America for 4 years, making films about conservation throughout South America. But it's a very special bird, as I think you can see from that, and one I've written about in magazine articles. The really good thing is, towards the end of my stay in Argentina, I helped organise a couple of workshops. Aves argentinus took the lead, and they've done such amazing work with the government that they've created an entirely new national park, specifically to conserve the hooded grebe. And so now, from a point of near extinction, hopefully things will go well for this amazing bird. It really is something that's completely taken my heart. I love it to bits. Right, let's head further south. Let's leave my emotion and passion for the hooded grebe behind. Let's head down to Tierra del Fuego, the land of fire, the uttermost part of the earth that Lucas Bridges wrote about. This is the place you'll be going to if you're going to go on an Antarctic trip. So take a couple of days around Ushuaia to look for flying steamer duck and flightless steamer duck. You can guess what the difference is between the two. If you see one flap its wings and actually move, it's not the flightless steamer duck. There's some other nice gulls down here. So I don't like gulls, but I do like this gull. The dolphin gull's good. The white-throated caracara hangs around dumps, which is a bit unshame, but it's quite a smart little raptor. And there's rare ducks such as the spectacled duck and great forest birds such as the thorn-tailed rayadito, sort of like a supercharged tree creeper. And woodpeckers are also supercharged here. So the Magellanic woodpecker is the largest extant woodpecker, or the second largest, something like that. So forget, yes, it's the largest. So now imperial and ivy-billed gone. This is the largest remaining. So it's quite a spectacular creature. You've also got the southernmost parrot in the world, the Austral parakeet, living down here as well. And if you were to go out at night, you'd see creatures like the rufous-legged owl, again, a classic of the southern Andes. As we're in the Andes, you might as well go out for a walk up the top. So that's Ushuaia down the bottom, the city that's the gateway to Antarctica. Just above it, there's a mountain called the Cerro Marcial, and there's a glacier. So this is quite an easy glacier to walk to. You can get a funicular up most of the way, so you don't have to walk up from sea level. And there you can look for yellow-bridled finch and other birds like white-bellied seed snipe that are true sort of, I was going to say high altitude specialities, but here you're seeing it just at 1,000 meters altitude, so very accessible indeed. Okay, we're going to leave the south. We're about just over halfway now. We're going to head up to the northwest. We're going to go into the high Andes, into the cloud forests of the mid-altitude, and into the desert scrub. This is where most of Argentina's endemic birds, birds that occur nowhere else in the world, live. Easily see 250 species in just under a fortnight. But you've got the benefit of amazing scenery, great culture, proper Andean culture, and vineyards. This is the wine growing region of Argentina, Mendoza, of course, being its capital. So this looks good. I was driving along here for the first time, looked up at this ridge and thought, ooh, do you know, if I were an Andean condor, I think I'd breed on those cliffs. And then a mile later came across this sign. And you don't need to know much Spanish to know that means there's condors in 6 kilometers. And sure enough, the Lord of the Andes occurs and breeds on these cliffs. Now, this is a species that, a bit like the vultures of Africa and Asia, has come a cropper by feeding on poison carcasses and is now globally threatened, which is a real shame for such an evocative bird, if not the best looking one. I mean, it's a face only a mother could love, really. But that feeding on carrion has resulted in real conservation problems. But there's now been a strategy to sort of come up with saving the Andean condor, and it reckons if you save a relatively small proportion of land, you will save something like 90% of the world's Andean condors. So that's a topic I wrote up for Near Tropical Birding magazine, which was published by that eponymous conservation organisation I mentioned, saving the Lord of the Andean skies. Up at high altitude here, we're getting Punareas, which is the high altitude subspecies of Lesseria. We're getting a different take on tinamous. This one's called the ornate tinamou. I'm not sure why it's any more ornate than any others, but those back and wing feathers are really splendid if you look at them close up. And up at this high altitude range, we're also getting some really special creatures. The diadem sandpiper plover is one of those. It is a species that basically people couldn't work out what it was. Is it a sandpiper? Is it a plover? I don't know. Let's call it a sandpiper plover, but there's nothing else remotely like it evolutionarily. This is also the domain of 3 species of flamingos that live at high altitude. You might think of flamingos as being in the Camargue or in the Rift Valley lakes, so down at sea level in the case of the Camargue. But here they occur at 4,000 meters altitude. And amongst them, sort of knocking on the edge, there are some wacky coots too. So horned coot, which has got the best haircut of any water bird I know. Sort of, like a cool person's fringe. But again, it's globally threatened. So these water bodies, they're desiccating because of climate change. So a lot of these Andean water bodies and waterfowl that live on them are in problems, having problems. Remarkably, even at 4,000 meters, though, there are hummingbirds. I mean, how a hummingbird can cope with the lack of oxygen that there is at high altitude is beyond me. But they do what hummingbirds do and fly around getting nectar from flowers. We're going to come down from that highest peaks. We're going to go down into an area where there's a little bit more vegetation, and in doing so, we're going to come down now along a river valley, and it's sort of less a babbling brook and more a raging torrent. This is the kind of river that a goosander would nest on where in Britain, and here the equivalent of a goosander is a torrent duck, and they literally ride these rapids superbly. It's a bit like if you want to go whitewater rafting, take a torrent duck with you, you'll get the best experience. But the little birds occur in these rivers too. So rufous-throated dipper was a particular favourite of mine. Very much like I'm a dipper, but exceptionally rare, again, globally threatened with extinction, and does the same old dippery thing of diving into water or hiding below water. This is also the area, these forests surrounding these rivers, area where you get the breeding endemics, so birds that occur nowhere else in the world but the Yungus of Argentina. So yellow-striped brush finch is one, Tucumán mountain finch is another, and sort of unsurprisingly, some of these birds have such tiny ranges and such specialised habitat requirements that they too are under threat of global extinction, so are on the conservationist radar as a bird of conservation concern. We're going to go down a bit more in altitude now. We're going to go into the relatively low-lying lands, the Monte Desert scrub. Here it's very arid. We've left behind the lush forests. There are loads of cacti around with big bird nests. This is the nest of that bird in the previous species, the white-throated cachalote. The sandy galitos run around here too. So it's very much a kind of stony, open land where birds tend to hide between whatever cover they can find. And indeed, this habitat is sort of shared with our next region, which is the Chaco and Cordoba. So you've got that Monte Desert scrub, you've got dry thorny scrub, and then further north, you've got damp palm savannas, which are the territory of the gauchos as well as down in the Pampas. So this is our penultimate region. This is a region which is renowned for endemic birds that occur in the Chaco. There's a few birds around Cordoba, which is an isolated massif, and there are birds that occur only around there, and some very special birds down the bottom of that list of bullets too. So we're going to go to the palm savannas first, these damp, wet palm savannas. This is a bit like, I don't know, it's not quite the Pantanal, but it's sort of that type of thing. So there's jabiroos knocking around, there are cattle egrets, there are black-collared hawks looking on. And this is the place to explore by horse. Now, I've never ridden a horse before, but my friend who was second from the left, who was the then boss of the BirdLife partner out there, made me go on a horse and go gaucho birding. So forget tango birding for a bit. We're going to go gaucho birding, and we're going to ride across these wet palm savannas, getting close views of jabiroos. We're going to look for remarkable long-legged birds like the red-legged seriema. And it's not just remarkable for its eyelashes, it's one of the very few birds that have eyelashes, but also because local residents like having them around their property, because ostensibly they keep away the snakes. They love eating snakes. Also in these grasslands, we're looking for small birds, so sharp-tailed tyrant is one of those. Its tail is roughly half its length, and its total length is 10 centimetres. So you've basically got 5 centimetres of tail and 5 centimetres of bird. This is a truly tiny thing, and it's quite strange that it's looking massive on our screens right now. Birds that are genuinely massive, however, are barefaced curassows. This is a bird, it's a bit like a pheasant, if you like. That's the female, and this is the male. And being a bit like a pheasant, that sort of makes it susceptible to being hunted for the pot. And that's the primary reason why this bird is considered globally threatened, which I think is a real shame, given how good looking it is. It's certainly quite hard to catch up with in Argentina. Elsewhere in this region, you've got spiny woodland, the Chaco woodland, and this comes with its own little subset of birds. So birds that have Chaco in the name, such as the many-coloured Chaco finch, or are otherwise remarkably endowed. So the scimitar-billed woodcreeper has got a bill that would make a hoopoes look short, and a voice that at this range really did hurt my ears. Um, Other birds that live on the trees in this area, there's black-bodied woodpecker, which is one of the rarer woodpeckers in the world. Looks a little bit like the Magellanic woodpecker that we saw earlier, but is in a different genus. This is also a good area for spot-winged falconets, again, a bird that is exclusive to this Chaco area. And the Chaco is also renowned for being a place where all the birds seem to have punk haircuts. So this is the brown cachalote. So I promised you some upstanding hairdos. So here's your first one. And then you've got the black-crested finch. And then you've got the crested hornero. And then you've got the crested gallito. And then you've got the lark-like bushrunner. And I mean, why evolutionarily has this particular area come up with all these species that have got pointy crests? Well, I mean, I haven't quite worked it out yet, but there's an argument that these crests can be used to provide some sort of shade. There's an argument they could be used in some form of display, but it just seems quite an unusual concentration of a particular morphological feature in a tightly defined geographical area. I said Argentina does brown well. We've seen a couple of brown birds just now. There's also the Cyclodes, a couple of species of Cyclodes that are fundamentally brown. This one is probably a subspecies, but it's endemic to a very small area of Argentina around Cordoba. And this one is definitely an endemic species. And again, it occurs only in an even smaller area of Argentina. This area around Cordoba is also known for Mar Chiquita, and those people who attended the British Birdwatching Fair, as then was, in 2018, may remember that it raised about £300,000 to create a new national park on the edge of an urban area called Mar Chiquita, which is basically a holiday destination in the centre of the country, but was also the fringes of a great water body where around 950,000 flamingos used to gather. Flamingos are three species, but primarily Chilean flamingo. So a very important water body indeed. So Bird Fair did well in supporting that. This year's Global Bird Fair, different entity, same people, roughly the same location, is supporting a project to save Antipodean albatrosses in the South Pacific. And that's the article that I finished writing yesterday and sent off yesterday to Birdwatching magazine. This area is also famous personally, or sort of memorable personally, for one particular experience that I had when living out in Argentina. So Mark Pearman is the guy on the right of the photo. He's the guy who wrote the Field Guide to the Birds of Argentina that I showed you. I remember him ringing me up and us having a conversation. I asked him, what bird do you most want to see in Argentina? And he said, I want to see Orinoco goose. So he's a British expat, lived out there for 20 years. I want to see Orinoco goose. But there's only been a couple of Argentine records. But I reckon it's somewhere in a valley in Salta. And I reckon the only way you can see it is to get onto a floating raft and float downriver for a week. And that's the way you might find it. So that sounded to me like a bit too much of an expedition. I'm quite adventurous, but that just sounded nuts. And so when Mark asked me to go, I said no, and in the end he didn't bother. A year and a half later, he rings me up again and says, they found Orinoco goose. They found it in Argentina. They found 200 of them. There's a massive flock. I'm going to go. Do you want to come? So, it being Argentina, me having a bit of time on my hands, being a house husband, I took a internal flight with him, and we met up with another friend called Jaman, who is at the back here. He runs a tour company called Seriema Nature Tours. And together with the National Park Guards, we had a good chat about where we thought these birds might be. Unfortunately, they hadn't been seen for about a month, so we decided we'd try and look for them. The only problem is, in the river valley, there's not much in the way of roads, and it's a bit of kind of, needle and haystack job. So we decided the best way to try and find this Orinoco goose and try and work out where the national park rangers could focus their attention um, was to hire a four-seater plane for 3 hours and to fly over the Rio Bermejo at about, I think it was about 190 meters above ground, and try and spot the birds from the air. Now, as kind of sensible ideas go, this wasn't one of our greatest. But we did it anyway. It was good fun. And amidst all the kind of bone shuddering and jolting around and lots of noise, and there's absolutely no chance of us finding a bird, from 190 meters up in this kind of terrain. Suddenly, I went, "Go on!" And this is the photo that I took from the plane at 150, whatever it was, meters high. Now, Mark very quickly uh, grabbed the location of his GPS, and the following day we got down to ground level. We worked out where the nearest road was. We worked out where the nearest drivable vehicle track beyond the road was. And when that ran out, we walked for about 10 kilometres. And as we got within 100 metres of the final bend in the river where Mark's GPS coordinate would be, we turned the corner, and would you believe it, there's this pair of Orinoco geese there. So this was a quite remarkable expedition and a quite wonderful way to close the penultimate section of our Argentina tour. But I've saved the best for the end. Hooray! We're going up to the northeast. We're going up to an area of subtropical forests, subtropical grasslands. This is Iguazu Falls. This is the Iberra Marshes, which are Argentina's riposte to the Pantanal. You can easily see 300 species in 10 days here. There are birds that are endemic to the Atlantic forest, which is one of the most threatened habitats in the world. So there's numerous globally threatened birds, and there's some really evocative species too. So this really is the climax, not just to the talk, but to your birding trip in Argentina. So we'll kick off in the subtropical grasslands of Iberra first. So the Maguari storks, which are a doppelganger for our white stork. There'll be southern screamers by the bucket load, but there'll be some really rare birds too. Really rare birds of grasslands, such as the black and white monjita, the yellow cardinal, which is threatened by not just habitat destruction, but capture for the cage bird trade. Strange-tailed tyrant, an absolutely nutty bird. I mean, look at those excuse for a tail feather. It's a bit like the widers of southern Africa. They've got the kind of bare shafts and then these enormous plumes at the bottom. And again, a bit like the demurred wiretail that I showed you in the beech forest earlier on. This is all about males showing off to females. So the males fly high up in the sky, sort of bouncing along, drooping these two kind of enormous tail feathers to try and attract the attention of females, and again show how strong that they are, that they can put up with these impediments to life and still survive. This was a bird that I fell completely smitten with, and I wrote not one but 3 articles about it and its conservation. Yeah, really, really special creature. But there's even rarer birds in here too. So I mentioned the seed eaters towards the start of the talk, and this northeast grasslands is sort of the home of seed eater speciation. They all have slightly different plumage, slightly different songs. They probably all were once the same species, but now they don't interbreed. And they're all very attractive for people who like putting birds in cages. So most of them are globally threatened. Same is true of this one, saffron cow blackbird. This all happens in an area where gauchos, where beef cultivation, literally is cultivation, is rife. And that's part of the problem. Cows eat grass, and when they eat grass, there's no grass for birds to nest in. So the economic mainstay of Argentina being beef, you've got a real problem on your hands as conservationists, and that's why so many of these grassland birds are threatened with extinction. And that's why Aves Argentinas came up with an idea to try and create a certification system to give a price premium to biodiversity-friendly beef. So if cattle herders could graze their cows sustainably on natural grasslands, then they would receive a price premium from bird-friendly beef. They could charge more on the market. That was the idea, and I was really lucky to be invited by the World Bank to write the project proposal to make this become a reality. create the Grasslands Alliance, put bird-friendly beef on the market. It hasn't reached the UK yet, which is a real shame. I had hoped it would have done by now, but it is a small but sustainable thing in South America. So this is a way of showing that you can have your cake and eat it. You can you can raise beef in a way that is consistent with bird conservation. So there's lots of good things that Aves Argentina is doing to help these globally threatened birds. From the subtropical grasslands, let's head into the subtropical forest. We'll go into the Iguazu Falls in Misiones, and this, I mean, for all Argentina's scenery is wonderful. This is the place. This is the most spectacular place, and the rush of water as it comes past you when these falls are in spate, absolutely amazing. All this torrential water is coming down, and I don't know how they do it, but great dusky swifts nest behind the curtain of water. They fly through the curtain of water to nest on the cliffs at the base. Remarkable creatures. How they're not drowned, how they're not pummeled, I do not know. You see they've got these deep set eyes, really, really protected eyes. And I guess that is in part through flying, to protect them from flying through water, also to cope with living in dark places. These are very special birds too. There's colourful birds in these rainforests, plush-coloured crested jays, very approachable chestnut-bellied euphonias, blue Dacnus, swallow tanager, rufous mott, taco toucan. Who doesn't remember the taco toucan from the Guinness adverts? So this is on my kitchen wall currently, little Guinness mementos, mementos of Argentina. There's hummingbirds knocking around here, so gilded sapphires, black-throated mangoes, but there are also proper forest birds too, birds that you have to spend time walking stealthily through the rainforest, looking out for movement. So when you come across a short-tailed ant thrush, you'll be really happy because this is a real skulker. Or when you come across a black-fronted piping guan, an endangered tree-living pheasant-like bird, you'll be really pleased. And this bird is also personally evocative for me. At the end of my final year at university, I led a student conservation expedition to Paraguay, so 30 years ago this year. And it was called Project Yacutinga, and it was all about surveying this bird, which in South America is known as the Yacutinga, the black-fronted piping guan, and trying to put Paraguay on the map as a place for conservation of rare birds at the Atlantic forest. And that's the same habitat that is in northeast Argentina. So every time I saw this bird, I was very happy indeed. Other globally threatened birds in this place, because this is a biogeographical mountain, the Atlantic forest, that is in the real threat of complete extirpation. I think something like 5% of the original forest cover remains between Paraguay, northeast Argentina, and southeast eastern Brazil. Venaceous Amazon is one of those. Creamy-bellied gnatcatcher doing a little bit better. It's only near threatened. White-beard antshrike, not very well. It's a bamboo-dependent species, and bamboo's being cleared along rivers. Temming seal eater is a weird one too. This is a species that is so dependent on bamboo and so dependent on flowering and seeding bamboo that it's nomadic, and it flies around the Atlantic forest region, so up to 2,000 kilometers, in search of flowering and seeding bamboo episodes. Now, if you imagine that there's only 5% of this area, forest area, left, and those forest fragments are getting smaller and smaller, and bamboo tends to flower only once every 7 years, this bird's got a real problem. It's carved itself an ecological niche that's going to be very difficult for it to survive in. And then you've got surprises. So black-capped proprieties. And the biggest twitch and distance terms I did from Argentina was driving from Buenos Aires up to northeast Argentina, about 1,500 miles, kilometers, I can't remember, a long way anyway, on poor roads. And going to see this, which was only the second ever in Argentina. And at the same spot, literally in the same 50 meters, we saw this bird, which is a second for Argentina. We saw a brown-breasted bamboo tyrant, which was a fourth for Argentina, and we saw a species of hummingbird that was a first for Argentina. And this, for me, is what really encapsulates the country. Yes, we know a lot about it. Yes, there's now a field guide to it, but there's still so much more that's ready for discovery. And that's why I think I was so fortunate to spend 3.5 wonderful years in this country with world-renowned scenery, with top-class birding, and with a supporting act of wine, football, gauchos, and, of course, tango. So that's almost exactly an hour. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to hand back to Debbie. And if anyone's got any questions, and I apologise for not having seen them yet, please do say. I'll stop sharing, and you can ask me now, whether in the chat or in person. So thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you. Thank you to you, James. I suggest everybody unmutes themselves and chips in at this stage. But personally, I'm almost breathless with excitement about this rapid trip around South America, around Argentina. It's been very nostalgic for me because I was there 20 years ago. I don't know if you've ever heard of a bird guide called Ricardo Clark.
I know Ricardo, yeah.
I drove across the Chaco with Ricardo, and my God, it was amazing. We saw the most phenomenal birds, many of them that you've mentioned. What you didn't mention, though, were the chiggers. Oh my goodness me. Just tell our little group about chiggers, just to balance the equation slightly.
Yeah, so I could have shown you a slide of chiggers and what the chiggers did to my leg. They are, I'm assuming they're tiny little mites. They bite, they release something that then makes your leg very itchy. Were you to scratch it, they turn into massive blisters. And I'm talking sort of marble-sized blisters all over your legs. That really wasn't.
Not to detract from any of the fantastic ornithological diversity, but chiggers was a bit of a downside as far as I remember it. Come on, what do you all got to say? So, Neil, I'm sure you've got some experience and others. Questions, comments?
Sorry, I'm having difficulty hearing you, Debbie.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying, I'm sure you've got some questions or comments for James. So you can kick off.
Well, I say a comment. Yeah, but one thing you mentioned more than once was a cage bird trade, which was a bit of a surprise and disappointment. Is that a problem that's under control, or is it something that is continued cultural problem in Argentina that?
Yes, it's definitely an ongoing problem. There's some researchers who have just done a survey into the CD to trade. How much of a problem it is. They're going to publish their results in August. It's not the same as in sort of Indonesia, where there are caged songbirds singing competitions. I've written about that for a couple of magazines. So it's not that level, but it's definitely a significant pressure. Yeah, these are attractive birds that sing well, and people like keeping them.
Very disappointing, isn't it? I was very surprised to see that feathered dusters are made from rhea feathers. Are they farmed for the purpose, or are they actually caught in the wild?
So it's a bit of both. So generally, the meat that you get, and you can have rhea pizza, for example, that's farmed. And a lot of the sort of wild birds you see are semi-domesticated in as much as they're in they can't jump the fences that go around the properties, so they can't get out. But yes, wild birds are killed for meat and for feather dusters. It is a shame. There's no need for it, but yeah, it does happen.
Bring you in, Leslie. The mention of Malbec must have got you going for a.
I did notice that very early on, yes. I've got an empty one here as well.
I'm looking forward to drinking one in about 15 minutes, I think. I came back from Argentina with just a taste for Malbec, and it's never left me.
No, that's right.
Our daughter was conceived in Buenos Aires. She was a leaving gift from Argentina for us, and she's hot-headed and fiery. So I think somehow the beef and the wines got into her as well.
Another observation from me, James, is that many of the Argentine special birds that you mentioned from the south are ones that I didn't see in Argentina because I didn't go to the south, but I have seen in Chile. And it just an interesting point is how good is the cross-border cooperation on bird conservation? Because I know the Chileans are very proud of their diadem sandpiper plover, and I think they were fairly mortified to discover from tagging that they spent the time out of the breeding season in Argentina. It was really bad news, I think, as far as they were concerned.
And
How is
indeed,
the cross-border cooperation?
It is quite amusing because several of the birds that were formerly considered Chilean endemics have now been found to cross the Andes and occur in Argentina too. The relationships between bird life partners tend to be very good. Unfortunately, in Chile, as far as I know, there isn't a bird life partner. There is a very active ornithological scene. So, as an organisation whose acronym is ROC, the ROC, and they've done a lot of survey work, but they don't do as much conservation work. So there is a bit of a gap in terms of conservation sort of parity between the two countries. But then they would say that anyway, wouldn't they? So Argentina is always trying to get one over on Chile. Chile is always trying to get one over on Argentina. But fundamentally, when it comes down to it, on birds such as the hooded grebe, which does cross the border, there's got to be cross-border cooperation. So that does happen.
Bring you in, Ian. Wasn't that your favourite bird video of the year so far?
Brilliant. One of some really colourful birds there. I was going to ask you something. I know it's not bird related, but how are the jaguars doing in South America?
Oh, crikey. So in Argentina, there's a project to reintroduce them to the Ibera marshes that's being carried out by the Tompkins Foundation. You may have heard of Doug Tompkins, passed away, but his foundation's reintroducing those as part of a rewilding initiative. In places such as the Pantanal, they're doing superbly because they are no longer hunted there, and there's an enormous density of prey, so caiman and capybara. So even in the 15 years between my two editions of Pantanal Wildlife, the jaguar population has risen through the roof. It's very easy to see them now.
Oh, that's good.
Elsewhere, they are still hunted in the same way.
That's great. Persecution of farmers was the problem.
Yes, so they predate cattle in particular.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and I'm afraid it's like wolves in northern or eastern Europe. Wolves were they reintroduced here, there'd be a lot of pressure from sheep farmers for culling to immediately happen. So any large predator that comes into contact with humans is going to face problems, unfortunately.
Thank you.
John, anything from you? John's a very regular visitor to our Zoom calls. Any thoughts from your side? John Dello? Maybe can't hear me. What about you, Lynn? Anything you want to check in on?
I'm just amazed at the amount of birds there are down there. So
Brian, you need to come
incredible
here to ask a question.
I mean, it was we were spoilt, 3.5 years spoilt. Coming back to the UK was, I mean, I think I've talked about it. I thought I would be bored because I had so much wildlife, so many birds in Argentina, but I discovered other things. And I was saying to Debbie before you all came and joined us, I've completely fallen smitten for the UK in the last 15 years or so. So I do miss Argentina greatly, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean I get bored in the UK. It's completely the opposite. The more you realise that there is a world of wildlife out there, the more you expand your wildlife horizons from birds to something else, then something else. The more you realise that there's a lifetime of fun, there's a lifetime of enjoyment, and you can never do anything but enjoy it.
Yeah.
James, Brian here. Can you hear me? I've just recently found that part of the world, and Buenos Aires, right way down to Antarctica. Fantastic. So loved your presentation today. You mentioned jaguars. I understand that when the visitors have left Iguazu Falls, the jaguars use all the trails that the tourists would otherwise be using, and they are thriving there.
That's really good to hear. The closest I came was seeing a mini jaguar, an ocelot, charging down the trail hunting a coati. No, being chased by a coati. That's right. Being chased by a coati, hurtling down the trail towards me. Yeah, Iguazu it's sort of unfortunate in that you, as a visitor, are only allowed in between 9 and 5 or something like that. But at the same time, that's great for the wildlife. And really, kind of, this national park should be for the wildlife. We should be the visitors. We should be removed from it. So it's great to hear that jaguars are taking over the trails, and that presumably means without hunting there's plenty of prey for them, and so they're doing all right. That's good to hear.
And you talked about the turns, but presumably you went on one of the boats where you can actually go through the waterfall itself, did you?
Yes, so this is at Iguazu, and yes, you can get very wet on boats going through the waterfalls if you'd like to. It's not something you take your prime optics on, put it that way.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Brian.
That was the swifts you were talking about, was it? Because I was going to ask you how you got those pictures of the swifts. This was, so you go on a boat behind the line of the waterfall, is that right?
So those photos were actually taken from the top of the waterfall looking down and trying to squint behind the curtain. So they were taken from land, but you can take boats and see the falls from a different angle looking up at them. And if you do that, then they tend to like you to have an immersive experience, if we can put it that way, and take you through the waterfall. So that's one way you don't take your camera or your binoculars with you.
That's very brave. We've got Roger Frankham, one of our former chairmans, online without a video. Anything from you, Roger?
No, I don't think you can hear me, can you?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
I can hear you.
No, I haven't got a question, no.
Good. And Barbara and Alan haven't chimed in, but I think it's safe to say, James, that this evening's talk has been one of the most beautifully illustrated that we've had for a very, very long time. The standard of the pictures and your narrative are outstanding. So it really is very, very nice to have had you come along again. I think we've all learned a lot. I, for one, didn't know that there was blue sky-type duck. I'm sure Neil, with his logical expertise, knew that, but I didn't know that. So that was an eye-opener. Action things that you threw in for us. I also didn't know the phrase diplomatic house husband. I think that used to apply to my husband, but not because of being involved with a diplomat, but because he was so charming. So yeah, that was a great term. So it brought it all to life for us. So thank you on behalf of all of us who've been for a very, very entertaining evening. Thank you for doing it on Zoom. And I hope that we might see you again before too long. You've obviously got a tremendous contribution to and local things as well. So I'll give you all a big round of applause as we used to do on Zoom.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. It's an absolute pleasure talking to you again.
And I don't know if there's anything from our